This time it's a quest for bottom end torque. And we ask the question, is there such a thing as too small of a camshaft for our 383 small block Chevy? This time on Engine Masters. It's come to my attention that not everyone wants the bottom of the page camshaft. You know, the super rumpity, choppy one, the one that revs to all kinds of RPM, requires like a loose converter, deep gears, all of that stuff. No, there are in fact people who want their V8 to be nice and smooth, to make good low-end performance and have a lot of torque. And you know what? That guy is often me. Yeah, in my rock crawler or in my tow vehicles, I really don't want the massive camshaft. I want the thing to turn the key and go and idle in traffic and make a lot of low-end torque. And finally, the small camshaft is the answer, and that's what we're gonna be testing for the first time ever on Engine Masters in the quest for low-end torque and to find out if there is such a thing as too small of a camshaft. You see, I think a lot of people believe the smaller the cam that you put in, the more torque that you make. All of a sudden, you're gonna go from 450 to 500 pound-feet if you put in a smaller cam. Well, we're gonna find out if that's really true. I'm gonna show you the 3 different comp cams, hydraulic roller cams that we're gonna test. But first, the engine that we're gonna be testing with. This is the engine you've seen a jillion times on Engine Masters. It's the one that I have called the Ultimate Average 383. This thing is a stroker 350 that is 383 cubic inches. It is a Blueprint Engines short block. We used to run a pretty nasty Dart cylinder head on it, but now it's got the Airflow Research Enforcers. They're 195cc on the intake. These aren't their full race series heads. These are their affordable line that still uses really good hardware, and in past tests, we found that they are the best of the low buck cylinder heads. Up top, we typically run an Edelbrock Performer RPM air gap intake manifold, but this time Steve Brule chose a much more tame low-rise intake, more typical of what people would run with these camshafts. It is an Edelbrock Performer EPS. Now, up top is a carburetor that I probably wouldn't run in this application, but that's not going to affect our testing here today. It's a race carburetor. It's a Holley XP. It's a double pumper, but it's smaller than we typically run. It is 650 CFM. You may notice that we've got an upside-down Wilson spacer in here. That is the Speed secret, by the way. Not really. It's just an open spacer. We accidentally installed it upside down, and it's on there so that we can get an idle vacuum reading. That's another point of data that we're going to give you, because higher idle vacuum can be beneficial for your application if you want to run your power brakes. So let's get into the tiny camshafts that we're going to run here. Small, medium, and large. Let me give you the series names of these so that you can easily find them at Summit Racing or in your Comp Cams catalog. And these are all Comp Cams hydraulic roller camshafts. The smallest one is going to be the XR252HR. The medium one is an XR264HR. And up top, we've got the XR276 HR. Let's talk about the specifications, and I'm going to give you duration at 50 thousandths tap at lift. Remember that duration is how long the valve is open, and the duration tends to affect where the power happens in the RPM curve. So smaller tends to be lower RPM, bigger tends to be higher RPM. The XR252, the duration is 200 on the intake and 206 on the exhaust. That is like a camshaft, only smaller. I guarantee we've never tested anything that dinky. Now we move on to the XR264. The duration at 50 on that one is going to be 212 on the intake and 218 on the exhaust. And then the so-called big cam, the XR276, is going to be 224 on the intake and 230 on the exhaust. All of these are on 110-degree lobe separation angle. The lift is a little bit different here. The smallest cam is 472 on the intake. Then we've got 487 on the intake on the medium one, and 502 on the largest camshaft. Now, you might say to yourself, well, you're not doing an A-B comparison because the lift is different. That's not really what I'm doing here. It's not just a test of camshaft duration. It's a test of the specific cams that you can buy right off the shelf. We're gonna kick this off with the largest camshaft and then work our way down. I'm gonna sit down with the Steves and ask them how we think we're going to judge this whole operation, and then we'll be making some noise with our 3D3 in the quest for low-end torque and finding out if there is such a thing as too small of a camshaft. First thing, guys, tell me what you think we're even looking for here. Like, I started this out going, how much cam is too small, but how are we gonna judge that looking at these power curves?
Every cam is too small.
The ones we're testing?
Every valve train is too weak.
Right.
That's the solution.
It's what I always say, there's no such thing as too big of a cam, just not enough motor.
That's right.
Well, in this case, they're all tiny cams, but when we look at the curves, like, is there a point at which we're gonna go, this gave up so much horsepower that we can't accept it? Or are we looking at the torque falling below a certain number?
My take would be is we're kind of looking for torque. You know,
right.
The torque, specific torque output, you know, you've heard me talk about that somewhere. My kind of theory is within a general range of camshafts, once you get into the 224s, 230s, the specific output of the engine is going to remain the same. It's engine speed that's going to dictate horsepower. So there is a point, I think, though, going that way, where it will actually lose torque.
Yeah.
Where the valve just doesn't open long enough, it's not open tall enough, it just is going to lose some torque.
But for me, it's more about the application. If you've got a tow vehicle or something like that, do you care about the horsepower that it makes over 5,000 RPM? Or do you care more about how drivable it is, how much torque it's making down low, where it really matters for your application?
I think that a lot of times the factories or OEMs may have a different agenda. And so a lot of this stuff, when the camshafts are 198 or 196 at 50, I think a lot of that may have to do as much with emissions and mileage as performance. But we're looking at the other side of it.
And total smoothness.
Yeah.
Which, on that point, I'd like to look at the idle vacuum of all of these.
I think all of these cams are small enough, we could probably look at them at a reasonable idle speed of like 800 or something.
right.
They're all small enough. I mean, if we pick 1,000, that's for bigger cams. All of these will idle and go in and out of gear with a stock converter.
Basically, all these cams make the engine and car really way more drivable and smooth, which we're normally not interested in at all. So how much load do we want on it at idle?
I'm going to basically say no load.
No load, yeah.
So what's your test regimen going to be? You want to idle it first or after your pull?
Well, it doesn't matter. I mean, we're going to get it up to temperature where everything's good. We're going to look at the idle air-fuel ratio. The timing is fixed because we're going to be swapping some cams, so I put a crank trigger on it. So the ignition time is going to be 36 degrees all the time, which will help idle vacuum some over a regular curved distributor. So we'll idle it down. We'll make sure it's at temperature. We'll make sure the air-fuel ratio is correct because that can affect idle vacuum as well. And we'll just try to make all the parameters equal between each one, and then let's look at the difference.
Okay, cool.
Okay?
Let's go.
Here we go.
We're trying to figure out how much camshaft is too tiny of a camshaft, and we just ran the biggest one of the group. Before we get into the power, let's talk about the idle situation. Remember we had discussed we were gonna run the thing at 800 and no load?
Yeah.
It ended up 800 at a load of 27 to 28 pound-feet.
Yeah, and the reason for that is because in order to get the sweep to go from 2,500 to 6,000 like we're running it, I'm having to fiddle with the absorber a little bit on the dyno. So there's already some preload built in. So there's actually, you know, it's difficult to just say absolute neutral, zero load. But it'll be the same with all of them, the same load.
And I still think it's relevant if you're idling in gear with an automatic. And the idle vacuum is 13 inches at 800 RPM.
You know, that's pretty good in gear. You know, I mean, that's plenty for power brakes, you know, vacuum boosters. It's great for all of that stuff.
Let's have a look at the horsepower and torque. Our power numbers are 465.5 pound-feet of torque at 4,300 RPM and 436.9 horsepower at 5,600. Pretty normal for what this is. Like a 4.25 horse 383 is like an aftermarket baseline standard.
You know, that kind of torque is, a few years ago, was big block stuff. And now at 383 inches, it's, I'm impressed.
What impresses me is the shape of the curve. I mean, it doesn't get much more picture perfect than that. There's no hiccups, no ups and downs, no variation. It's just smooth all the way up.
And way down here, by the way, we're pulling down to 2,400 RPM, which is about as low as we can go. Don't forget that on the dyno, that's 2,400 RPM at full load, wide open throttle. And it's metering okay and driving okay and making power.
Yeah, and to that point, you know, I purposely put a smaller intake manifold on this, or in my mind, a smaller intake manifold. It's a Performer EPS, I believe the designation is, hoping for something that would pull down low. We've had some of the larger cross-section manifolds, like the RPM, air gap, and those sorts of manifolds. And obviously, while they make more power, they don't run as good at low RPM as this manifold does. I'm really impressed.
And that's what we're looking for in the episode is low RPM, basically. That's it. Now we get to install a tinier camshaft. How often do we say that?
Let's go shrink the cam.
.224 cam, gone. 212 cam in. So far, we've run the 224 at 50 camshaft, the biggest one of the test. Here's our power numbers for our new 212 at 50 camshaft. 464 pound-feet of torque at 3,900 RPM, and the horsepower is 407.9 at 5,100. Those numbers are gonna mean a lot more once you see the graph and we start to discuss it. But let me tell you about the idle vacuum first. At 800 RPM, with a little bit of load on it, had 18 inches of vacuum, up from 13 with the 224 cam.
Adding to that 18 inches of vacuum, it's something that I really had never paid much attention to. I had to go out and adjust the idle mixture. There was so much better signal at the carburetor at that kind of idle vacuum that I had to go out and lean the carburetor out because it was too rich with that much vacuum.
Are the screws only like half out?
Getting close.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting. Normally we see like 3/4 to 1.5 out on our bigger cam stuff. This is supporting your theory about torque potential, and the camshaft simply moves it up or down.
So far, so good.
Because we had 465 pound-feet of torque with the 224 cam, 464 here, call that the same thing, but the peak RPM went from 4,300 to 3,900.
Way down.
And the question about how we lost all the horsepower, basically 30 horsepower, we went from 436.9 to 407.9, but the RPM changed from 5,600 to 5,100, and that's all about horsepower as a function of RPM. Horsepower is torque times RPM divided by 52, so you see RPM's in the equation, so an engine has to make RPM to make more horsepower.
Right. The higher RPM at which you're making a given amount of torque, the more horsepower you have, so.
But the 212 cam just can't get there.
No.
It doesn't have enough duration to carry the RPM. Let's look at the overlay and see what the real difference is between these two camshafts. Whoa. All right, the black lines here are the cam we just tested, the 212, the smaller one. Just an enormous difference in horsepower.
Right.
But look at the torque. Not just the peak, but the area under the curve, the area from 2,500 to 3,500.
I think this goes to what Steve initially started the day with was, I think it's application. And so, you know, if it's a street car, you may want the bigger camshaft. If it's your tow truck, I'm down there with the smaller one.
Yeah, up to 4,000 RPM, the little cam's got the advantage.
Yeah.
Because the other thing that we noticed is the 224 cam has a little bit of a lope.
A little bit.
And this one with the 212,
It's smooth. It's
nothing.
Stock, yeah.
It's just, ooh.
Yeah.
The question is, are we going to see a bump in torque with the 200 F50 camshaft?
That's the one I'm the most interested in.
I think that's going to start to kill power, but we don't know until we know. I'm already kind of tired of changing camshafts.
It took 45 minutes. How
We were
tired
pretty
can you
speedy.
be?
We were pretty good. All right, we're going to do it again. Now comes the tiniest camshaft of the test. We're going to go install a 200 F50 cam. That just doesn't even sound right to say out loud.
Never.
And now, the smallest camshaft we've ever intentionally installed in an engine. Now we've got the minuscule camshaft installed. It is 200 duration at 50 on the intake. The question is, does it kill power? Does it shift it all to the bottom end? That's why we test.
Wow, that killed a lot of power.
Yeah, it did. We've tested 2 camshafts so far, one that's 224 at 50, one that's 212 at 50, and here comes 200 at 50. It's ridiculous. Look at the horsepower for this thing. It is only 363.4, and I will remind you, our 383 Chevy made as much as 436.9 with the 224 cam. Then we look at the torque. 452 pound-feet of torque at 3,700 RPM, which is also a drop from what we've seen. There's the curve right there.
No real surprise, I don't think. We knew at some point in time, if you don't have the valve open long enough for it to get some air. I mean, kind of what we're looking at, in my opinion, here is we're looking at the volumetric efficiency curve. And if the valve's never open long enough or tall enough, it doesn't have enough air to do anything up here, and it even gets to the point where it loses torque.
Let's look at the comparison versus the 212. Because Dulcich was saying it's going to make more low-end torque.
Well, I thought it would, yeah.
I'm going to say no. Yeah, no.
lost some.
Well, I have to give Dulcich credit. It makes just a few more numbers. The black lines here are going to be the 200 duration cam, and red is 212. Look at that. You're right, Steve. It made a speck more torque down here.
The infinitesimal, I mean, those really small gains you get there at the very bottom, it's just nowhere near worth the trade-off at top.
No. No.
Do we agree that we found too small?
This is definitely too small of a
Too
cam.
small, yeah. One thing you do gain that is notable, though, is smoothness.
Actually, we didn't talk about that. The vacuum on the 200 at 50 camshaft was 20 and a half at 800 RPM, but not as much as a jump. Look, the 224 cam was 13 inches of vacuum, 212, 18.1, and then 20 and a half on the smallest cam, the 200. So there was a bigger change between the 224 cam and the 212 than there was from the 212 to the 200.
Sure.
Sound-wise, the 224 still had a little bit of a lope. The 212 sounded stock, and the 200 sounded like it was strangling. It really, I walked in there, it wasn't even loud.
No, it just has nothing out the exhaust. There's no overlap.
The other thing that we know is that idle vacuum goes up the smaller the camshaft. And that's going to be because overlap is less.
Yeah, there's less overlap.
The next thing is we found definitely you can have too small of a camshaft. It is possible.
It is possible.
I think we have consensus on that.
I think a lot of people think that the torque just keeps going up and up and up with the smaller camshaft, and this tells you that's just not it. Or if it is, it's by such a small amount that you don't want to even be that guy.
And like Brule said, I think that's going to cross over at some point if you go even smaller, where the bigger cam will make more torque there, where we're seeing just a slight.
Well, if you don't open the valve ever, it's not going to make any power.
Right.
The other thing we know for this specific application, which I think is extremely common in the real world, the 383 10-to-1 average cylinder head, it really, I think, wants the 212 cam for a tow truck and the 224 for a very tame drive around street machine.
I agree with that 100%.
Yeah.
And we talked through the sound of them. I think the sound is a huge thing that people pick camshafts for. And if you get the 212, it is not gonna sound like the Saturday Night Special drive-through Lopi thing at all.
It sounds like nothing.
No, it's gonna sound like the tow truck that it's meant to be. All right, there's an off-camera argument that we're gonna have to solve about displacement versus camshaft, right?
Well, I would say that would be pretty interesting to me.
Would it be pretty interesting for a future episode of Engine Masters? And now, the smallest camshaft we've ever intentionally installed in an engine. It's true, right?
It is mini, yeah. This is the smallest camshaft I've ever put in anything.
On purpose.
Well, actually, it's the smallest I've ever put in anything, even by accident.
I might have R&R like a stock deal with a smaller cam, but as far as an aftermarket cam, there's no chance I've ever picked anything like that. It's all about the combo this time as we find out which manifold or header is best for your camshaft. Find out this time on Engine Masters. Here's a test that comes straight out of the mind of my co-host Steve Dulcich, who has told me for years that the smaller your camshaft, the less your exhaust headers matter. Well, we're gonna find out if that's true, and this is one of those episodes that is a complete over-deliver because you're gonna see other stuff as well. You're gonna see the difference between a small camshaft and a big camshaft, and you're gonna see the power of a cast iron exhaust manifold versus a shorty tube header versus a long tube header. So much in this episode of Engine Masters. Let me tell you how we're gonna do it. First of all, we're gonna use our venerable 383 stroker small block Chevrolet. Let me tell you about the specs on that baby. It's a Blueprint engine short block. It is just basically a stroked 350. It's got a 750 stroke crankshaft in it. This thing is almost 10-to-1 compression. The cylinder heads on it these days are from Airflow Research, the Enforcer line, which is their lower buck series, and we found these to be the best of the cheaper small block cylinder heads that you can buy. Up top, we've got a smaller intake manifold than we typically run. This time, it's got the Performer EPS, a low-rise intake manifold. We got a 1-inch spacer on it, and the carburetor is a 650 CFM Holley XP. Now, how about the specific manifolds and headers we're going to be testing? First up is going to be the Summit Racing cast iron exhaust manifold that is sort of like an OE Chevy Ram's horn. The difference being, it does have the 2.5-inch outlet on it. Not all of the factory ones do. After that, we're gonna have a look at the Hedman tight tubes. These are block hugger headers, and they only have a 1 5/8-inch tube on them, and once again, a 2.5-inch outlet. Finally, the dyno headers that we run all of the time, and we know that these actually make more power than a typical under chassis header. These have a 1 3/4-inch tube diameter and a 3-inch collector. Now, how are we gonna execute this test? What we're gonna do is run each of these exhaust systems with 2 separate camshafts. The first one is a Comp Cams hydraulic roller that's itty bitty. It's from the line called the XR252HR. The duration at 50 thousandths tappet lift is, wait for it, 200 on the intake and 206 on the exhaust. That's really, really small. And then we're gonna step it up to the cam we're used to running in this engine, and it's wildly different. It's got 30 more degrees of duration on the intake, so it's 230 at 50 and 236 on the exhaust. That is a big swing in camshaft. So once again, you're gonna see those 2 power curves, and you're gonna see all of these manifolds. But first, I'm gonna go ask Steve Dulcich directly, what is his theory about why a small camshaft would not require as good of an exhaust header. All right, Dulcich, cams versus exhaust. Explain your theory.
My theory?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, exhaust is an important aspect of making power, and people tend to think of it as a matter of restriction. And restriction is definitely a part of it, but I think the more important aspect is the scavenging you get with a header compared to a manifold. And the scavenging is going to depend on overlap to have an effective time window to do its thing. So my theory is with the big cam, the headers help a lot more than they do with a small cam. So if you have a little small cam motor, the header benefit is not as great as a big cam motor. So what do you think?
What he means by scavenging is, of course, the wavelength tuning of the header that is removing exhaust and drawing air and fuel in during overlap, which means the intake and exhaust valve are open at the same time, that point in the camshaft. And with the smaller cam, there's less overlap than with the bigger cam. Does that summarize it?
Well, it clarified it.
Okay, perfect. So if your theory is true, I think what we should see here is that a change from manifolds to headers will have a greater percentage of gain on the big cam than with a small cam. Is that how we're judging this?
I would say so. And when you say from manifolds to headers, I think the long tubes are definitely going to have a lot more dramatic of an effect than the short tubes, because I think the length of the short tube doesn't lend itself to the reflected wave reaching the cylinder head during overlap.
Makes sense. I mean, basically, I threw the shorty headers in because I just wanted to know if they make more power than cast iron manifolds.
Yeah, that's the interesting point. I mean, historically, shorties have not been great performers.
Right.
But it'll be interesting to see if they're any better than this.
Yep, on two different camshafts. Right now, I guess it's just baseline with the cast iron. And actually what we're gonna do here, I think we should just run the cast iron manifold, the shorty header, and the long tube, and then we'll come back and tell everybody what happened.
Yeah, I think the advantage to that is we might have a bigger picture of what everything kind of does instead of trying to beat it up one piece at a time.
Okay,
All right.
give us a
Here we go.
baseline. And now the block hugger tubular headers.
We have the long tubes installed. Now it's going to come down to seeing how much power they make with the small cam in the engine.
Ta-da! Okay, Steve, first thing is, I don't know if we should get this thing a milk bone or take it for a walk. This is a pooch. This does not make power. The power numbers with the cast iron manifolds are 441.9 pound-feet of torque at 3,600 RPM and a weak 347.9 horsepower at only 4,500 RPM. That is bad.
Yep.
Combination of bad cam, little itty bitty cam. I guess I shouldn't say it's bad.
No,
it's just
small.
tiny,
Yeah.
very tiny, 200 degrees of duration at 50 on the intake, and manifolds that I gotta hope are a restriction.
I would have to believe that there's somewhat of a restriction.
Yeah.
I hope.
That's really bad. My question though, and this is a big one, it's part of the reason I wanted to do this in the episode, is, are the Shorty block hugger tubular headers better than the cast iron manifolds? I really wanted the manifolds to work, but I don't think so. Let's see.
Oh.
This is more interesting than I thought. The black lines are with the manifolds and the red lines are with the Shorty headers. So the little Shorty headers actually were better everywhere power-wise. The peaks are 449 pound-feet of torque at 3,500 RPM, and the horsepower 357.4 at 4,800 RPM. We haven't seen this before with Shorty headers.
No, not every time. I mean, I'm actually surprised that they actually perform pretty well. I've always kind of given them the nay, don't bother, but
Well,
this is decent.
It probably means that the manifolds are ungood. That would be my guess.
That might be too.
Yeah.
It's around 10 foot-pounds across the board. I'd say I'd average somewhere in there.
Except for right here, for some reason, they're really close, but
Yeah.
everywhere else, yeah. And I'm not gonna blanket say this is a test that applies every time, because there's different manifolds.
No, I
that
was
could
going to
be
say, I
different.
think you bring up a really good point. We don't know that absolutely that that's a great
We don't.
iron manifold.
And that manifold is aftermarket, but it does have the 2.5-inch collector, which is
Yeah.
better than a factory one, which is
2
usually
inch.
2 or
Yeah.
2 1/4.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we don't really know, except we know these Shorties are better than those
Yeah,
manifolds.
I mean, I'd probably head for a Shorty now. I mean, at this point.
But head for the long tube, because then we're all gonna go, oh yeah. Now we're looking at our long tube headers. To clarify, the red lines here are the long tube. The blue lines are going to be the Shorty headers, and the black lines are the cast iron manifolds. The power peaks with our long tubes, 454.8 pound-feet of torque at 3,700 RPM and 366 horsepower at 4,800 RPM. And it's interesting that the long tubes are better at every point above 3,200, but look, they actually take a dive right there versus the Shorty headers.
You know, I have to say, for as long as I've been doing this, I don't think I've ever done this test with this small of a cam. So
no
these
one has.
these are kind of interesting
Or
results
ever
to
will
me.
again.
No, this is actually pretty good stuff, though. I mean, it still says that headers are worth something.
They
For
are.
sure.
The gains, to me, are kind of incremental. I mean, the
Yeah.
manifolds, and then, boom, you go to the Shorties. It picked up some, and then it picked up almost an equivalent amount going to the long tubes.
No, I think what I learned here is that surprisingly, long tubes are better with a tiny camshaft,
and that's-
which means the Dulcich theory to hold up has to show an even bigger difference at each step with the bigger cam.
And do we look at that in power numbers or
percentage?
percentages?
I would say-
I'm going percentage.
I would say percentage. Like I said, you're showing incremental gains with all of those different things. I mean, would you get greater incremental gains with a big cam?
That's what we need to know.
How do we find out, Freiberger?
We're gonna go install a bigger cam, and then we're gonna run all 3 exhaust systems again and see what happens.
All right, time for the Shorty headers. Let's see what these do.
Okay, we got the Shorties off, and we've got some real exhaust installed in it now. So we've got long tubes. We should get back to some sort of reasonable power level. This should be fun.
Now Now we've got data to share. With the cast iron manifolds in the big camshaft, the torque was 444.9 at 4,500 RPM, and the horsepower, 417.6 at 5,500 RPM. Hey, that is a massive difference between this and the small cam. You know, later on, I want to compare with long tubes, the small cam versus the big cam, just because we can. But right now, we're looking specifically at the exhaust. So let's overlay the shorty header and look at the difference there. Big difference again. The power with the shorty header that's tubular was 458.1 pound-feet of torque at 4,600 and 437 horsepower at 5,600. I think our belief is that the manifold is restrictive, and that's why it's showing this big of a gain.
Yeah, I think so. And I could almost hear it. It sounded like a plugged muffler, you know, when it would get up into higher engine speeds. There just, I don't think, is enough flow there for that kind of power this engine makes.
Yeah, that's a pretty significant gain from manifolds to shorties. That makes me go, I'm not a manifold guy. Steve and I were talking about this off camera. We're like, how can the manifold be that bad? And I think it's because the way it's designed, you got 2 cylinders going in each tube.
Yeah.
And so one cylinder is blowing out and presenting a flow restriction to the second one, depending on where the firing order is. I'd have to look at that, but it's got to be why.
Yeah, it gets confusing. I mean, it's just kind of, it's so common. We see it in the boat manifolds, car manifolds. It's just something that you struggle with.
Yep. I like manifolds still because they're quiet, but hey, I'm old. Let's overlay the long tube header and see what kind of difference that made with the big camshaft. Interestingly, not as much of a change as it is between the manifold and the shorty.
I would have expected more there.
How weird. The peak power numbers with the long tube header in the big camshaft are 470.7 pound-feet of torque at 4,300 RPM, and the horsepower is 448.2 at 5,600. And I think we're at the point also where this intake manifold is restricting this camshaft.
I don't think there's any doubt. We've done combinations just identical to this with a Performer RPM air gap on it.
Yeah.
And the things are closer to 465 or so. This manifold is just designed for something different than a Street Performer manifold. It's designed for lower engine speed.
You know what's really interesting that I noted with the small cam and our step through manifolds, shorties, and long tubes, the torque number didn't change that much.
As far as peak?
As far as the peak number, I mean, it went from 441 to 449 to 454, whereas with the big cam, it went from 444 to 458 to 470.
All the way to 470.
Wow. Yeah, so
That's
a much
big.
bigger change in the torque. But the thing that we must conclude out of all of this is that Steve's theory is correct.
Oh.
Yep. It makes a bigger difference to have headers on a larger cam than with a smaller cam. Here's the numbers. What we did is we took an average of the power range for each of these cams. And to be fair, it's a different power range for each camshaft. We went 2,800 to 5,500 with the small cam and 3,300 to 6,000 with the big cam. It's the same number of data points. But when you're looking at that average, with the small cam changing from the manifold to the shorty, we only saw a 1.9% change in torque and 2.1 on horsepower. But doing the exact same thing with the bigger cam, we saw an increase of 3.3 and 3.5%.
Yeah, it's a lot more.
Yeah.
So it makes, your conclusion is right. It makes much bigger difference to have headers with a larger cam than with a smaller cam.
And when we're talking 1 or 1.5% difference, that doesn't sound like much, but it is. It's a lot in this type of curve overall.
And the other thing that's interesting, though, is when we change to the long tubes from the shorties, the difference between the two isn't as much of a percentage gain, which you can see here.
And you know, I have to say that this is as good of long tube as you're going to get.
Yeah.
You know, you do a chassis header or something, so that might even tighten up some with a chassis style header. I've been kind of not real fond of shorties forever, like don't bother, don't waste your time. But I mean, this is showing me a different kind of aspect of it, that maybe there's something there for guys who have ground clearance problems or that sort of thing.
There are applications for it for sure.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is, if you want what the engine's capable of delivering, there's only one choice.
Yeah.
The long tube for me.
It is, but I would say the blue line here, the shorty header, that's not an undrivable engine.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
Yeah, it's pretty good. It could be better with a long tube, but On a Jeep, I'm not wanting to negotiate past the front axle and dragging the ground on a lower car and all those other things.
Exactly.
Yeah. Huh, interesting. All right, just because we can, we got to show the difference between the small cam and the big cam with the long tubes. Oof. As you may have derived by now, the black lines are the big cam and the red lines are the small cam. And if you've got a tow truck, go ahead and get that tiny camshaft, but if you're anybody else, I would put the bigger cam in the thing.
You know, I think this illustrates really well why we had to use different RPM ranges. There's two completely different applications. You just can't compare the same RPM range with two cams that are so radically different.
Let's conclude. I think still the manifolds are a great, tight-fitting application that's quiet. They don't break. They're cheap. They're easy.
They have their place.
But they suck. That's the problem. They don't make power. They also hold heat bad.
They do.
That's a big problem. As a matter of fact, when we change them on the dyno, we have to blow down the engine room for a long time just so we can handle that manifold.
Yeah.
And I guess my other conclusions are it's way easier to fit the shorty and the long tubes make the most power. And the final conclusion is the wise and all-knowing Engine Masters was correct once again.
One more time.
Yep.
Yeah.
You need to give me more ideas so we can do more shows where you're right.
Dave comes up with enough that he's right, so it's only fair.
It's your turn.
Okay.
More Dulcich science coming up on future episodes of Engine Masters.
And now, the shorty headers.
Wow.
Okay, Steve, first thing is, I don't know if we should get this thing a milk bone or take it for a walk.
You now have something better than Clifford.
We have another engine, Clifford, the big red dog. This is a pooch. This does not make power. It's
Does
junk.
what it's supposed to below 3,000.
I guess so. You've got an average cruiser, low buck, big block Chevy 454. Which intake manifold do you need? Well, we're gonna test them all and find out. It's another Engine Masters intake manifold shootout, this time for the big block Chevrolet with oval ports. This is gonna be sort of a real average cruising type of 454, where the dual plane manifolds that are more oriented towards the street will be like perfectly fit for this engine. I'm gonna tell you about all the manifolds. First, let me just run through what this engine is. It is a 454 bottom end, and it would be similar to something that you would have pulled out of like a 94 Chevy truck or something like that. It has very low compression. It has GM Performance Parts heads, which are Roval ports. Remember that the big block Chevy from the factory had basically 3 ports. There was the peanut port, which was oval and tiny. There's the large oval port, which is much larger and oval. And then there's the rectangle port. Then Edelbrock made something that we call a Roval, which is sort of a rectangle with very rounded edges. So that's the engine. It's only gonna make like 450 horsepower. Next, the manifolds. I went shopping and was surprised to discover there really aren't that many options, especially if you want a high rise for more power than average. Let's go over what we've got. First, there's the Edelbrock RPM air gap. As you know, this is the manifold we recommend for virtually everything that runs under 6,500 RPM on the street. Sort of our standard. By the way, this example of the RPM air gap is coated black. This one that's on the engine's actually the one we're gonna test. It's not gonna make a difference in power. Next, there's the Speedmaster intake, and I will tell you that to the naked eye, everything about the inside ports on this thing is identical to the Edelbrock RPM air gap. There's some differences on the outside, but I would expect these manifolds to perform the same. Let's get into the much lower rise intakes. First, the Edelbrock Performer 2 oval port. This one is the lowest height. It's also got the smallest ports of any of them, and I believe it's the oldest design of any of them. Moving up in height, we've got the Wyand Street Warrior, and then the Summit Racing intake, which is taller than either the Performer or the Street Warrior. And I mentioned that just because hood clearance might be an issue for you. A Corvette, like a Stingray, is a perfect application where you probably need a lower intake if you want to run a conventional stock hood. Also, for your information, the two Edelbrock manifolds are designed and cast and machined in the United States, and all the others are Chinese. So that's kind of the roundup. You know, we've learned that you can't glance at manifolds and really determine what they're going to do. But if you look at them, there is some interesting stuff. You can see that the Edelbrock Performer and the Wyand Street Warrior are the only two that are designed to accept a spread-bore carburetor like the Rochester Quadrajet that would have come factory on a lot of 454s. I think it's funny that the Wyand Street Warrior has a different waffle pattern on the floor on each side. I don't know, fuel distribution stuff. The Summit has a giant notch taken out of the middle of the plenum between the two planes. Who knows what that does? That's what we're here to find out. All right, let's talk to the Steves and then fire up our gutless 454 and find out which one of these intakes is best for you. All right, guys, we've ridiculed this engine in the past.
Stop.
What?
We're setting ground rules right now.
What's that?
Ooh.
We will not be calling it Clifford one more time.
Clifford,
This
the
is
big
now
red dog.
known as the Merc 7.4.
Well, my point was going to be, it's actually the perfect engine to test these intake manifolds.
It's designed for these intakes.
This is what I used to do, pulling a 454 out of a truck or like out of your Suburban, throwing some heads and a cam on it and go.
Yeah.
They make 480 to 500 depending on the compression and, you know.
Well, and this thing doesn't have much compression. These Mercury Marine
Yeah.
motors, they were like 7.8 to 1
I
from
know.
the factory.
Oh.
This has got a little smaller combustion chamber, so gosh, we might have even bumped it up to 8.2.
Yeah, but still, I think it's typical. It's a good
Yeah.
way to throw together a cheap big block and have more power than a cheap small block.
Agreed.
And it's exactly the right thing for these intakes.
Yeah, agreed.
What's the first one we're testing here?
This is Speedmaster, not necessarily for any particular reason, except after sorting through and pre-fitting. We wanted to make sure we had everything fit, pre-fit, no gasket problems, interference, that sort of thing that we've run into in the past. So that just happened to be the one that we ended up with on last and figured we'd bolt it down.
Let's run the Speedmaster and see what our baseline power is.
Let's do it.
That is a dog.
I could hear that thing barking from here.
That is a dog. We're testing a bunch of intake manifolds on our 454 big block Chevy, and the very first one here is the Speedmaster, and it made 537.8 pound-feet of torque at 3,600 RPM and 465 horsepower at 6,000 RPM. The first thing we notice is the massive spread, 2,400 RPM between peak torque and peak horsepower.
That's
Why?
actually a really good thing.
Well, I
could be.
guess, yeah.
Well, I mean, it's making peak horsepower at 6,000, but it's not making a lot of horsepower at 6,000 now, is it?
It doesn't make a lot of horsepower because it doesn't make a lot of torque either. And that's, in my opinion, because it's 8-to-1 compression. A typical 454 with 10-to-1 compression would be in the 565 to 575 range as far as torque. This is down at 537.
The horsepower, it seems kind of low for that tall of a RPM peak.
It's kind of 1 horsepower per cubic inch.
I guess so.
It's 8-to-1.
It is what it is, I guess.
Yeah, it doesn't mean that we can't compare the different intake manifolds, in my opinion. I think it's an application, like I said, where you would be running the dual
You know,
planes.
I can't tell you how many times we've taken truck motors, 454s, out of trucks, put them on the dyno and switched to a large oval port head, or, you know, cam them up, because you're limited on camshaft too, because there is really no valve to piston clearance in these things. So you're very limited on cam, and they make kind of, you know, 460 to 500, depending on what you do with them.
Can you take the motor out of my Suburban and make it a 500 horsepower 454?
Yes,
you
I
would
can.
be thrilled with this in your Suburban.
I know.
You
I
absolutely would be. That is what it is. Let's go to the next manifold. Continuing with our 454 intake manifold shootout, we've tested the Speedmaster, and now we're going to the Edelbrock Performer 2.0 for oval port. Remember I was pointing out that manifolds don't always bolt right up? Check this out. The end rails are The next manifold that we tested is the Edelbrock Performer 2 oval port, and this is the intake that's designed for peanut port heads, and we think that's reflected in the power numbers here. The horsepower was 436.2 at 6,000 RPM, and the torque 532.5. So that's a big nosedive in horsepower versus the first intake, but surprisingly, the torque is the same, 532 versus 537.
Yeah, it's visibly a lot smaller intake manifold as far as cross-section and stuff.
And lower and everything else.
Yeah, it's all of it. I mean, I think it's designed more for truck general purpose kind of applications, not so much for what we're trying to do.
Let's show exactly how much you don't want to choose that for, you know, a roval port head or a big oval port.
Or this.
Yeah.
That's a big drop.
The red lines are the big high-rise intake with the larger ports in it, and the black lines are the low-rise Performer with peanut ports, and you can see the penalty you pay. It's the wrong manifold for the cylinder head.
Yeah, for this application at wide open throttle, it's just not the correct choice.
Yeah, it's not moving air. That's the problem.
Yeah, it diverges, it kind of says that, shows it.
But then again, it's 436 horsepower. I think it must have been designed on like a 396 or a 402. Actually, peanut ports didn't even come out till it was a 454.
No, and when you think about the truck applications, you're talking more like 330 horsepower, not even into the 400s.
Remember, they made 290 from the factory.
I know.
That's what probably they were designed for.
Yeah.
The carbureted junk, they were hideously slow back in the day.
I had one, I know.
So were the TBIs.
They were also.
Right.
Yeah, but this is obviously designed way back in the era of a carbureted 454 motorhome. It's flanged for a quadrajet.
Yeah.
You know, it's not a performance intake. It's a...
And it's reflected in the power numbers.
Totally.
Yeah.
We got 3 more manifolds to go, and the next one's gonna be the Wyand Street Warrior.
The Wyand Street Warrior is almost fully installed, then we're in the dyno, firing this thing up and seeing the power it makes.
Manifold number 3 is gonna be the Wyand Street Warrior. Our next small port, low-rise intake was the Wyand Street Warrior, and honestly, it's got better numbers than the Performer 2 oval port. Still not what you would really want to see. 446.5 horsepower at 6,000 RPM and 535 pound-feet of torque. Once again, making the same torque way down here.
Yeah.
Right.
But then they just fall off. And I think we were talking more about that Performer in this as well, thinking in a truck, they never run past 4,000.
They don't. I mean, 4,400, if you leg it out, I mean, they're just not that kind of engine speed.
But nonetheless, compare it to the Performer. And the Wyand, which is a newer design, I believe, is way better. Wyand in the black lines and the Performer in the red lines. Bottom line, I wouldn't buy either one of these manifolds for this application.
No, not for this application, certainly not.
So far, the Speedmaster is still in the lead, but the air gap is still to come, and that's the standard by which we always judge these dual planes. But the next one we're gonna run is still small port, but bigger than these last two. It's sort of a tweener, and it's the Summit intake. Let's see if this thing fits. When we're fitting it, what we're looking for is bolt hole alignment on both sides and the gap right here at the end, which in this case is pretty good. All right, Steve, you want to slop it?
How much of a gap is there?
1/8 inch. Here's the data for the Summit Racing dual plane. The horsepower 451.5 at 6,100, and the torque 518 at 3,500, which doesn't mean a lot till we compare it to the Wyand Street Warrior. I find the peaks are often deceptive, and it's normally what we just ran when we were magazine editors.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and before there was software where you could do graphs, everybody made that mistake of just looking at peaks, and that did not tell the whole story.
Oh, here's why you need to look at the whole thing. The Wyand is in red and the Summit is in black. The Summit picks up a little bit at the top end, but I'm not trading that for this meat in the torque curve, especially for an engine like this that would be in a lower end application.
No, absolutely, I agree with you. It's,
Now, David,
Steve will take that.
well, I'm not too sure, but would you say that can be attributed partially, at least, to the way the center divider is cut way down?
The Wyand is cut way down. You think that's what's going on up here?
It helps it
Or down
on
here?
the top end.
Yeah.
It also can hurt it on the bottom end. It's like adding an open spacer.
Oh,
you know,
true.
we see it tilt the curve just by adding an open spacer.
And that's what we've got, is the tilted of the curve.
Yeah.
The Wyand is winning at every point below 4,700 RPM, and it's winning above 6,000 RPM.
The reality of it is this is really not a 6,500 RPM engine anyway. So I'm absolutely going to head for the Wyand.
Yeah, me too.
Versus the Summit manifold. I mean, it just spends so much more time down there.
Are you willing to concede?
I'll give it that, yeah.
Okay. Normally, Dulcich picks the highest horsepower regardless.
Okay, I'll go with the highest horsepower. That Summit is clearly superior up top, so that's the one I choose every time.
All right, here comes the Edelbrock Air. Here are the peak power numbers for the Edelbrock RPM. The horsepower, 469.9 at 6,000. The torque, 540.3 at 3,500, which appears to be just a speck better than the Speedmaster.
What a surprise, an Edelbrock Performer RPM air gap doing well.
Once again.
It wins every single time. Let's look at the overlay to see if that's actually a true fact. The one that looks identical. All right, the black lines here are the air gap, and the red lines are the Speedmaster, and you can see that the Edelbrock is just a speck better.
Yeah.
And made in America.
Made in America. You did a lot of measuring I saw over there when between takes you had the calipers out and you were measuring port heights
did.
and widths and sizes and...
Well, the Performer is the smallest. followed by, I think, the Wyand or the Summit. Maybe those were the same. And of course, the Speedmaster and the Edelbrock RPM were identical.
Appropriately sized for this cylinder head.
Yeah, seemingly. Yeah, you know what surprises me, I think, about this whole test is, aside from, you know, these last two high rises, there's not a good intake manifold for a 454.
Well, I mean, in this application, this is the standout, but the rest are just kind of, they're in there somewhere.
I think that they're for the application we were talking about earlier, where it never revs above 4,000 and it makes a little more torque down here.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, let's look at the best of the low-rise intakes, which I think was the Wyand. This is going to be a comparison of the best torque from one of our low-rise intakes versus the air gap high-rise intake. So the red line is the air gap and the black line is the low-rise, and there's no chance I'm ever choosing the low-rise for the
No, you know,
It's better everywhere.
the Wyand compared well to the other low-rise intakes, but still comparing it to this, comparing it to this is still better from 3,000 all the way up.
It backs up the thing that I've tested and always said, which is the RPM makes more power than the low-rise intakes. I don't want to say always because I end up being wrong, virtually always.
Yeah, I'll go with that.
I'll go with that.
You and I ran a stock-ish, I don't know, we ran a 224 at 50, 305 one time.
Yeah.
And we put the RPM on it, and it made more power than the baseline low-rise.
It seems to be the one every time.
Yeah, there's no reason not to run it on a mild engine even. I've run into that a lot when people are asking me for advice and they say, well, what intake manifold should I get for this engine? And it's just a mild combination. Put the air gap on it.
Yeah.
Or the RPM, which is
The difference would be hood clearance, like your Vet, for example.
right.
Yeah.
Not when I put the L88 hood, I'll have clearance for the air gap.
You know, I would have almost expected to have one that was kind of a hot street application and one that was a truck application to see some tilt in the curve, and we just don't. We just see that this RPM, and ours is an air gap style, but we see where the RPM just is a really good manifold.
What do you say we never do a dual plane shootout again, and we just go the RPM is best?
No, we still have to test.
I guess so, but we've done it on what? Small block Chevy, big block Chevy, small block Ford, both 302 and 351, and 440 Chrysler.
Well, then we have 360 left.
360.
Mopar.
We haven't done, no, you've done small block Mopar, for sure.
Have we done it here?
Not on the Engine Master
Not
show,
on the
but
show.
we've done it for journalistic publications.
So the question is, how many
460.
intakes are even available for a 360?
A lot.
Once again, are there? Really? Still?
Yeah.
Okay, well, maybe that's an idea for next time. Do you want to see it? More intake manifold shootouts? We've done a whole bunch of them, but there are more engines to go. 460 Ford, Pontiac, Oldsmobile, small block Mopar, going
Buick.
down the list. We never run out of ideas on Engine Masters.
That's a nice bead.
Yeah. Ooh, I'm shaking.
I know. How come?
It's,
And he got the skip jump spot.
I did. I'm having to pull pretty hard, so I'm shaking.
These ones.
Why are we even using the tops?
Why did Sir Edmund Hillary climb Mount Everest? Because it was there.
This is not Roco Garage. This is Engine Masters. This is a serious show.
What is oil viscosity? What does it do in your engine? Can it make power, and why? All of that this time on Engine Masters. Our new sponsor is Driven Oil, and they're letting me do something I've always wanted to do, which is a test of various viscosities of oil. They said, you know, we're not sure what you're gonna find out on the dyno, but hey, let's go for it. So what we're gonna do is look at a couple of different viscosities, and we're gonna do horsepower, we're gonna do temperature over pressure, and we're gonna compare the two viscosities to see if there's a difference in temperature over pressure To sort of get an idea of the viscosity index being the oil's ability to maintain its viscosity over a broad range of temperatures. All right, this can get kind of complicated, and so let's go over some oil basics. First of all, what is viscosity? It is a measurement of a fluid's resistance to flow. A higher number is thicker, a lower number is thinner. So therefore, a 520 oil is thinner than a 2050 oil. The thing you need to understand, which I didn't and a lot of people don't, is that the viscosity test for the high number, for example, the 50 in 2050, is handled completely differently than the W number, the low number, the winter number. Here's what that's all about. Let's say you got a 2050 oil. The 50 is measured at 212 degrees. And to simplify it, they basically put it in a test tube with a metered orifice and they time how long it takes to flow out of the tube. That's how it's measured. But on the W number, the lower number, the 20 in 2050, it's totally different. That is a measurement of resistance to spinning. They take sort of a vein and put it in a bath of oil and spin it, and the lighter the oil, the faster it spins. Therefore, they can sort of extrapolate the oil that will flow best at the coldest temperature, and they kind of then adjust that to rate for an SAE viscosity rating. It's fairly complicated. The main thing that you need to know is that the W rating, the 20, is there because oil manufacturers wanted to be able to have a thinner oil on cold startup so that it gets all through the engine as quickly as possible. They just didn't want to have wear and tear on startup. There's a whole lot of other stuff in oil that is tuned for your specific application. Next, let's talk about this GP1, which they recommend is like their ultimate hot rod oil. The GP1 is a semi-synthetic, and they admitted to me that, you know, the way the oil industry works, it can have a very, very low percentage of synthetic in it to be called a semi-synthetic. Apparently, the thing about the GP1 here is that it's good for hot rods because it has the potential to make power because the additive's in it. And it's really good for fuel contamination, like if you're running methanol or if you're running E85 or if you, like us, run your gasoline car way too rich and you get a bunch of fuel in the oil. They've got additives that prevent that fuel from breaking down the oil and causing it to be thinner. It will stay thicker longer with contaminants in it. In the hot rodding world, a big one is main bearing and rod bearing clearance. Let's say you've got 3,000th rod bearing clearance, which is fairly big, and you're doing that because you've got like a supercharged application. Another application could be really, really tight, like perhaps a new LS that is 1.8 thousandths. And the thing is, you need a viscosity of oil that matches what that clearance is. Thinner for a tighter clearance, thicker for a bigger clearance. That's one of the main things because you want to maintain what's called a hydrodynamic wedge, which is the lubrication that is between the crankshaft journal and the bearing to separate the two of them so they don't touch and so they don't shear the oil. Wow. That's a lot of stuff, and honestly, it's real basic because there's a lot more to it. Now, the two oils that we're going to be testing here are a 5W20 and a 20W50. I want to find out, does one make more horsepower than the other? But what's really interesting is looking at the different temperatures you can run at. Remember how the high end of the SAE rating is based on 212 degrees? We're going to run these oils at 212 degrees, but we're also going to run them down at 100 degrees. And what I want to look at is how pressure and power changes when you have different temperatures. But the other thing to do is to compare the two oils to see if one of them diverges and has a bigger problem maintaining that viscosity index than the other one. So that's the oil test. What's the engine we're gonna use? Honestly, it's kind of a weak Chevy 454 big block. The bottom end is a Mercury Marine crate engine. It's got like 7.5 or 8 to 1, and that's the problem with it making big power. We're guessing that the camshaft in it, based on the power curve, probably has 224 duration at 50,000 tappet lift. It's probably a CompCam's XR276HR hydraulic roller. It's got the GM Performance cylinder heads on it, which were made by Edelbrock. And the intake manifold is an Edelbrock RPM air gap. Up top, we have a 750 Holley on there, and it's got a product that isn't available anymore, which is Percy's jet plate. So you can just turn a screw and adjust the jetting. So that's what the engine's all about. Now I'm gonna sit down with the Steves, and then we'll have a little bit of a discussion and start to make noise and see if there's really a difference between different viscosities of a really good quality oil. We don't even know what we don't know. We're gonna find out as we go.
Isn't that normally the case?
I guess so.
This time more than ever, maybe.
Oh,
Because,
totally.
yeah, this kind of information you just can't come by that easily.
Now,
You know, this is one of those tests to me that sounds so easy, but the more you think about it and the more you figure out how to get it done, it becomes
Yeah.
really complex.
well, that's gonna be on you because the big thing
thanks.
is, well, it is,
It
is
is.
gonna be the control of oil temperature and water temperature. And the reason for that is the water temperature affects horsepower. And if we're trying to look at different horsepower between two oils, then we need the water temperature the same, but we also need the oil temperature the same. So that's gonna be hard, but you can do it. I think what we're gonna do is start with our thinnest oil, go to the thickest one. So the first one going in is going to be the 5W20 driven GP1. I'm in the control room here with Steve because we're keeping an eagle eye on these two fields right here, which is oil temperature and coolant out. We really need to keep that stuff repeatable,
Yeah.
which is difficult. And so we're gonna kind of look at this first test and agree on where we should start pulling the engine based on what we think we can duplicate with the other oils.
Yeah, you know, it's not unusual at all when we're testing this stuff that we kind of figure out some of our test procedures during the first set of testing. That way we know that we can duplicate it through each of the tests and be accurate so we can compare back to back.
So now what we're gonna do is heat up the oil by running it at about 3,500 RPM under a fairly big load. And then we'll try and cool the coolant temp back down and run it again. At 225, you'll see this frame turn red. There we go. Right, now we shut it down and wait for the coolant to cool, and hopefully the oil stays fairly hot. As a reminder, this is with the Driven 520 oil, and I'm gonna start by giving you what's actually the least important data at this point, which is the horsepower and the torque. The torque is 541.4 at 3,500 RPM, and we made 468.8 horsepower at 6,000. But before we have another oil to compare that with, really, I think the story is in the oil pressure.
Yeah, I think so too.
Here's our oil pressure curve cold with a peak of 66.9 PSI and a nice curve. We got
Beautiful curve.
no windage garbage or anything
Yeah.
like that happening up at the top. If we have a windage problem, we often see the pressure just, you know, do this and then
Yeah,
up at the
it gets
top
ugly.
end. How about hot? Our peak with hot oil is 53 PSI. You can see that the hot oil has lower oil pressure everywhere because
Yeah.
it gets thinner. And what's interesting is that hot oil is honestly where the spec is for the 50 weight because it's at 212 degrees, which is what we ran it at.
Yes.
So that's right at that number. The question is, does the hotter oil make more horsepower? So now we go back to the power curve and compare those two things. Pretty good. The black lines are the cold oil, which was about 100 degrees, and then the red lines are 212 degrees. And you can see that the hotter oil makes a little bit more power, as we've seen time and again. It's no mystery.
You know, ask any drag racer. It's hot oil, cold water, that's how it's gonna make the best power.
With the hot oil, our peaks are higher. The torque is 544.7, also at 3,500 RPM, just like it was before. And the horsepower, 472.4 at 6,000 RPM. So yeah, up a few numbers everywhere. The thing I'm really curious about, though, is what happens when we pour the thicker oil in. If we see any difference or, trends that are not the same as far as how quickly it gets hot, what the difference is in pressure, all those things.
I'm curious too, because I can't tell you how many times a drag racer will opt for a thinner oil because he can't heat it up like we did. So instead of a standard oil that's got 212 degrees, he's gonna go to a 0 or 10 weight oil at 100 degrees, and it's gonna have the same sort of viscosity, looking for that power.
What's interesting is I was speaking to Bill at Driven Oil about exactly that, and he was working with the guys who run in the NMRA, where it's Coyote stock. It's ostensibly a stock engine, they drag race them. He said a bunch of the people were running that 0 weight oil, but they were actually losing ring seal. And what they would do is they would pour in an additive that would make more power, and they go, hey, I make more power. And he's like, well, you could have just run the thicker oil to begin with. So it's not always about the thinnest oil to make the most power.
It's not. It really is a combination. I mean, when you look at the higher levels in drag racing, Comp Eliminator, Pro Stock, those sorts of things, the ring technology is way out there. I mean, they're like 1.2 millimeters. Pro Stock stuff is even as thin as 28 thousandths. They're gas ported. Ring seal has, they've really gone to a lot of extremes to get great ring seal. So they're able to get away with that. A regular stock Eliminator car, not so sure that that's beneficial to start running 0 or 10 weight oil.
Interesting. So the next test is going to be with thicker oil, and I hope that we can derive things about whether the thicker oil is hotter at the same coolant temp than this is, because that's what the theory is, but that's not what your real world experience shows.
Going back to what you said before, one of my fears is running a really thin oil under a high load situation, like a lot of power, a lot of pressure on that contact interface can squish that really thin oil out, especially when it's very hot.
The hydrodynamic wedge, that's why you want a thicker oil with a larger bearing journal clearance, and also why guys with superchargers tend to run heavier viscosity, so you're not displacing
the ultimate example there would be a Top Fuel motor.
70 weight straight is what they run in Top Fuel engine.
But I'm going to be curious, when we put the heavier weight oil in the engine, I mean, how much of a penalty are we really talking about in power, if any?
Well, you can go burn your hands and drain it out, and I'll go ahead and pour the new stuff in.
And then I'll find out.
Let's change the filter, too. That makes sense.
I'll take a nap.
Yeah. Okay. All right, changing oil for power and pressure. There's our cold oil run just to observe. It looks like the oil went from 100 degrees to about 119 on that pull. Now our chore is to get the oil up above 212, like 225 degrees, shut it off, and cool the coolant back down to 125. There's 225.
Or 225.
Yeah, it took longer and it took a hotter coolant temperature to get there. This will be interesting. Let's go sit down with Dulcich and discuss. First up, we've got the 2050 Cold. The peak numbers here are 539.2 pound-feet of torque and 464.4 horsepower. But now we're going to overlay it with the same oil run at a higher temperature. And after looking at the last test with the thinner oil, this shouldn't surprise you too much. Sure enough, the hot oil makes more power, to the tune of 548.5 pound-feet of torque and 478.5 horsepower. That's big.
That's a huge difference.
Yeah, I like it a lot. Now what we're looking at is oil pressure, cold versus hot with the 2050. So the peak oil pressure when it was cold was 73 PSI, and the peak when it was hot was 60 PSI. Once again, the hotter oil gets thinner.
Thinner, sure.
Right. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not 50 weight when it's hot. That's the thing that I think is sort of a mind boggler. We ran it at 212 degrees. That's where oil is rated, so that's where it's a 50 weight. Not out of the bottle. Not cold out of the bottle.
I got you.
Right,
Okay.
pore viscosity is different.
No.
Yes,
How does
no?
that compare to the thin oil is what I'd like to know.
Let's have a look. What we're looking for here is to see if the viscosity index is different between the two oils. The black lines are 2050 cold. The red lines are 2050 hot. The green lines are 520 cold, and the blue lines are 520 hot. And it looks to me like the gap is about the same.
Pretty similar.
Yeah,
I
it's-
remember it was 14 and change pressure differential on the thin oil and 13 and a tiny bit on the thick oil. So
And of course, the reason that the thinner oil's lower pressure is just because it's thinner to begin with.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so I don't think that's very instructive. That's not really teaching us that there's any big breakdown based on temperature between these two oils.
No, it's just kind of what you would expect as things heat up. Thinner is going to have less pressure, thicker is going to have more.
And the thin oil versus the thick oil didn't do anything differently.
No.
That's what we're deriving from that. The last thing that we should look at is the temperature gain between the two, which I'm going to assume is going to be the same because the pressure was the same, right?
that would follow, yeah.
Our next graph is showing us if one of the oils gets hotter during a dyno pull than the other. And by the way, the scale here, from here to here, is 1 degree. So it might look drastic, but it's not. It's 1 degree. The red line is the 520, the thinner oil. The black line is the 2050, the thicker oil. And basically, wherever it starts dictates where it finishes.
Yeah.
That's what this gap is.
And it kind of train tracks. It's the spread is the same basically throughout the run. It's 1 or 2 degrees difference throughout.
Yeah.
I
So
don't
it's
see
the
any
same.
significant change or variation on how fast it's heating up.
Not at all. And maybe we're just dealing in a range where both of these have a viscosity index good enough that they just don't care. We don't know.
There's a lot of data here, more than I thought we really had initially. And, you know, not a surprise, we always learn more as we go, but there's a lot to sift through here as far as what's happening and what's going on and why.
But wait, the most interesting thing is coming up right now. All the rest of this is just stuff that doesn't affect your life. The next one makes Dulcich and I really, really happy.
Ta-da.
And there's the Mythbuster that is going to change your world. The red lines that made more power are the thicker oil. That's the 2050. The thinner oil made less power.
Right.
Because most people think you pour in really thin oil because then there's less resistance to pumping, there's less windage loss, you know, less frictional loss, all that stuff.
All of those things are correct.
But
That's not the story.
it is overcome by the fact that the thicker oil contributes more to ring seal. All right, let's conclude. I think the first thing I've got to do is walk back my enthusiasm for the 2050 because honestly, the whole ring seal theory and the more power, the thicker oil is unusual at best. Like the guy at Driven told me, thinner oil will always make more power up to the point of it compromising ring seal.
Yeah.
And we've seen that in plenty of testing. Thinner oil makes more power.
Yeah, over and over again. This engine may be a little bit unusual. You know, it's got wider rings, a ton of laps on it. And in this case, maybe this is a bit unusual just because it did help ring seal. That's the only explanation for that divergence in the curve.
It still opens up a subject I had never considered. I didn't know that oil could contribute to ring seal.
And by a pretty dramatic margin when you look at the horsepower gain up at the top.
Yeah. So that's my big takeaway from the episode is that it has that potential, but it doesn't mean it's going to happen every time. As a matter of fact, it's probably going to happen in rare occasions. The other thing I think we have to admit here is that through all our struggle to look at temperature over pressure and viscosity index and everything else, I think honestly the dyno doesn't have the capability to push the oil to the point where we can really conclude on that.
Oil testing becomes a huge volume of information. I mean, this is only just a piece of it. You know, when you look at the lab testing, you know, we've done oil testing in the past where it goes to the lab, it goes to the dyno, it goes to the race team, and then makes that circle 2 or 3 or 4 times before they actually settle on a blend that everyone is happy with. So it goes on and on. There's a lot of depth to it.
So I think more talking and thinking than hard data here. An unusual result with the power. I learn something every time, and this was one of them. Ring seal from oil.
Once again.
Yep. Maybe we can dig up more freakish power gains. That's kind of what we do on future episodes of Engine Masters. This episode of Engine Masters is just simple and fun. It is an air filter element shootout. This time we're gonna find out which color air filter element makes the most power. Not really, but kinda, because man, you can see they come in a variety of colors and styles. There are so many air filter elements available on the market these days. I just want to do a quick shootout to find out if there's really any differences in any of them. So you're gonna get 2 things. You're going to get paper elements versus cotton elements, oiled elements, and then you're also gonna get a brand-to-brand shootout. So I bought everything that I could that appeared to be different that was in stock at summitracing.com at the time we did this show, which is June 2023. I brought my crib notes because I wanted to give you what all these are and what the prices are of them, starting from cheapest to most expensive. First, we're gonna test an All-Star Performance paper filter. That one is $12.99. Mr. Gasket paper filter, $15.72. Then Summit has their own line of air filters, and now we get into the cotton gauze oiled air filters. These are available in blue, black, or red. Strangely enough, red is $34.99, and you can get the other colors for $26.99. I don't think there's a difference in performance, it's just the colors. Next up, we have one from Spectre Performance. This is $31.99, available in red or black. I got the black, which I thought was pretty cool. Edelbrock sells one that's called the Pro Flow in blue, black, or red. That's $34.95. Then we get into the green filter. That's actually the name of the company that sells them. It's not just the color. The green filter is $58.42, and then the K&N is $77.99 on sale at the time we're shooting this. They're normally $89.99. Now, as we test these, one thing we cannot do is judge the value of the filtration on any of these. We don't have a way to contaminate them uniformly, and we don't have a way to sort of analyze what particles are being passed through them. So this ain't that. This is going to be a power test, but I can also sort of give you some observations on each one of these. The 2 paper filters, I really wanted to get a super cheap one that hardly has any pleats on it, and I couldn't find that. And so the All-Star and the Mr. Gasket are extremely similar, though clearly not made by the same company. They're not the same exact thing. The thing I'm talking about on pleats is air filters can often be judged on how many folds they have, you know, per inch or all the way around the thing. If they have very few folds, that means there's much less surface area on the filter, and that's gonna tend to mean that it won't pass as much air and that it won't catch as much dirt and stay cleaner and useful as long as if you have a whole bunch of folds, but I couldn't find a super cheapie. So that's just a little bit of information that applies to both paper filters and the cotton gauze. Other observations that I've got to get into are that the only 2 here that are made in the United States are the green filter and the K&N filter. Now, I got to lead with K&N because this is the company that actually popularized high-performance cotton gauze air filters. They did it way back in 1969. They really invented this marketplace, at least as far as I know. And that product, while it is the most expensive, I will tell you sort of just based on intuition and handling it and fondling it, it's the highest quality unit here. It fits better, the folds are more consistent, the way the wire is like embedded in, it seems more solid, it's a little bit heavier, so that is the nicest unit. The other one made in the United States is the green filter. Here's the thing about that. I took the green filter, and I took all of these actually, and held them up to the light and looked through them. That green filter, you can see a lot of light through the thing. You can actually see some voids in it. And I'm like, what is going on with that? And I wondered to myself, how can this filter anything compared with these other guys? And I read up on their flyer, and here's the deal. They say that they use less cotton layers in their filter than, for example, the K&N. And they say that their oil magnetically charges the screen so that it can catch negatively charged dust particles. I suppose the cotton is there then to catch the positively charged dust particles. There's no way we have to verify all of that. However, the company's marketing does explain why that one seems to be more see-through than the others. What we're gonna do is throw all of these on one engine and just test them, and essentially we're gonna look at horsepower and find out what the airflow is on them. What engine are we gonna use? My 408 LS. Super simple. All we're really using it for on this episode is to suck air and find out which filter is best. Okay, guys, ready for the least ambitious episode of all time? Yeah, this is gonna be simple and easy, but when I came up with the idea, you're like, dude, people ask the question all the time, so here we are.
No, it's I like our discussion. You know, I mean, some of the most basic things really are what guys are the most interested in.
No, I want to know too, and I think we learn something every single time, but I do want to add a little bit something other than just air filter elements. I think we should still test it just with an open carburetor. In the past, we've seen that it loses power with a dropped base. I think we should run through that again.
I think we saw that with a drop base with an element. I wonder about just a drop base.
That's true. We could run just a flat base, just a drop base, and then start putting filters on it after that.
Yeah.
However,
Oh boy, money time.
we're not going to see a difference of more than just a dyno variance of 2 or 3 horsepower with any of the filters, including the paper. What?
Ooh, I'll take you on that.
Yeah?
Yeah.
You will?
Oh, you betcha.
Okay.
No, I'm actually going to go with you and bump Dulcich another 20.
Okay.
I'm in. There's going to be more than 1 horsepower difference between them.
That's not what I said. I
Dyno
said
variation.
variances. So
Dyno
do we call that
variances.
2 or do we call that 3? 3.
3? Get out of here, Brule. 3?
We can't just look at peaks either. We're going to have to look at the average. We're going to have to agree that it made no difference.
All right, I'm going all in.
So we have a friendly bet on the table about what's going to happen with the air filter elements. But first, we're going to fire it up and run it with no air filter on it at all. And then we're going to probably fiddle around with some bases, and then we'll get into the elements. Steve, let's see our baseline. On the open carburetor, nothing modifying it at all. We saw 508.6 pound-feet of torque and 541.3 horsepower. So let's run out there and we'll test both the flat base and the drop base, and then we'll come talk about what happened.
Perfect.
Our first test with no filter and just a base is with the dropped base. And now the flat base on the carburetor. Steve's about to pull up the test with the dropped base on it so we can compare it to what we saw with nothing. Whoa.
That's a lot.
The comparison here is the black line is with no base on it, and then we put the dropped air filter base, and look at the power it picked up. It made 5 horsepower up top. I bet you the flat base does the exact same thing.
You're talking one.
Yeah, the flat base does the exact same thing. It is 1 horsepower difference. We're not counting that. So legitimately putting some sort of air transition into the carburetor helps.
It helps.
Which we've seen many, many, many times. I
No
just didn't
surprise.
expect 5 horsepower all the way up top.
Well, the reason I thought it was kind of cool to put a base on it is because you see so many guys at the track, if they're drag racing, they'll take the filter off. But I see some guys with no base and some guys with a base, and I think it's important. One is to kind of keep the engine temperature away from the
That's a
air
big
inlet,
one.
and then to contour it as well.
And also the reason why it makes 5 horsepower up there and not down here is simply airflow demand.
At
It
a
makes
much
bigger
higher speed,
difference.
so that contour makes a bigger difference.
Yeah. When we do our filter testing, which base do you want to use?
I want to use the flat one.
Yeah. We'll test it all with flat, and then I think at the end I want to go in and test with a filter, the flat and the dropped.
I think that's a good idea.
Now we're going to start testing filters, and we're going to run in there and test our 2 paper element air filters, and then we'll come back and pick a winner on that, if any.
Our first test is going to be the All-Star Performance 14 by 3-inch paper element. That's the cheapest filter in the test. I'm going to add this paper gasket. You'd be surprised how much dirt can get right between this edge and the carburetor air horn. And all set, ready for testing.
Now the basic paper element from Mr. Gasket. What's on the screen right now is the power with a flat base, but no filter on it at all. So let's see how much power a paper air filter element kills. Black lines is no filter, red lines is with a filter, so that you can see that you do lose some grunt everywhere in the curve by adding that paper filter.
Pretty significant from top to bottom.
How did the Mr. Gasket do? Now we're looking at a comparison of these 2 paper filters. The red lines here are going to be the Mr. Gasket. The black is the All-Star. They're the same. Those 2 paper filters really are identical. I think the worst part of all of this to me is that I couldn't get a Fram filter. That's the one that I always used when I was a kid because I wanted that orange rubber on there.
That orange rubber was
That was the key.
Yeah.
Yeah. So honestly, I think most of these paper filters that have a pleat count like this are going to do that. The next thing that we're going to test is all of the oiled cotton gauze air filters. And I think I want to run those maybe in order of price. Does that sound right? So I think the first one up is going to be the Summit. We're into our air filter element shootout. We've already seen that our paper filters kill a little bit of power versus no filter at all, but now we're looking at our aftermarket oiled cotton air filters. First one up is going to be the Summit brand oiled cotton gauze air filter element. And the cool black looking filter element is from Spectre. Next up is the Edelbrock ProFlow. Can you guess which filter this is? It's the green one. And our last filter, the biggest name in the aftermarket, K&N. We just came back from testing a whole bunch of oiled cotton gauze air filter elements, 5 to be exact, and we've pulled up the power curves of all of them right here on the screen. And as you can see, they're all pretty much the same, but there are differences. So on a zoom in, that's the difference right there. It's interesting. You can actually see they're fairly well grouped together, except for the green filter, which happens to be the green lines, actually is up ahead, but it's by a really minute amount. So among all of the oiled elements, the difference in peak torque is 1 pound-foot. And then the difference in peak horsepower, 2.8. Then the average, meaning the average from the whole range of RPM, 2.1 on torque and 2 horsepower. So that's, that's the difference that we're looking at.
Amongst these brands.
Amongst all of these filters. So while this looks like it's standing out right here, if you look at the scale, at best, it's 2.8 horsepower. So we established that I believe that all of our oiled filters are essentially the same, although the green was just a speck better by a horsepower or 2. So what we're gonna compare here is that green filter that was the best of those to the worst of our paper filters. And I might add that by worst, I mean by 0.6 horsepower. And so that is going to be the All-Star paper filter in the black lines and the green filter in the red lines. So you can see, in fact, the difference between a paper filter and the oiled filter can be significant enough that we need to do this. Although I misspoke at the top of the show because what I meant to say is all of the oiled filters are the same, and what I said was all the filters are the same.
Thanks. You just lost 40 of my dollars.
I did. Yeah, I know.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, you won because the ultimate gap here, remember we said that we would go within 3 horsepower? Well, at peak horsepower, the difference here is 4.4. And at peak torque, it's 2.7. I still would think that we would see it closer here and further apart up there.
Well, and we are as far as, if you look at the
far as
power
horsepower,
curve, it kind
yeah.
of, it does do that.
Well, regardless, I think we know that the paper filter doesn't make as much power as the oiled filters, but I think we also assume that the paper filter filters more.
Yeah, looking at those 2 filters, you cannot see through one of them.
Yeah.
The other one, you can look right through it.
Well, the other consideration on these, though, is how much dirt can they hold before they start to degrade performance? That's one of the claims to fame of, like, I think K&N initiated that entire concept. And the other thing that Steve and I have dealt with before on Roadkill and Roadkill Garage is driving through a massive puddle, driving in the rain with your paper filter.
You get a paper filter wet, and it won't let any air through it. As a matter of fact, you'll just suck it right into the can.
The next thing is I really want to try the drop base versus the flat base. Which element do you want to do that with?
The green.
Do we want to, though?
Oh, yeah.
You do?
Oh, absolutely.
Because it was the best one?
Yes.
I think that's fair.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now we're starting our last test. First up is going to be the green air filter with a flat base, and then we're going to change it over to the dropped base and see what happens. And now the drop base. This time, we really didn't see anything. There's one little glitch on one data point where the drop base actually made a little more power, but all throughout the curve, nothing this time.
I wonder if part of that has to do with the demand, too. I wonder if this might show different results on an 850 horsepower engine where there's a lot more demand and you've restricted that area.
And I'm not sure if we tested it earlier on a carburetor with a choke horn.
Yeah.
Because the choke horn sticking up off the top of the primaries is going to get way closer.
That's a really good point. If we did that, then there's almost no room there. I've measured that. I've seen it. It's like it shuts it down to almost nothing. The drop base is actually always kind of, in my experience, showed to be kind of a nice contour and entry into the top of the carburetor. So.
Well, and while picking at minutia, to be fair, this green filter made the most power. I mean, it made more power than no filter at all. It might be making the airflow a little bit more linear through there.
We're just using that at this point because it doesn't seem to be at all restrictive. It's a spacer
right.
between the bottom and the top. So we've still got basically an open bottom that's contoured.
All right, I am prepared with conclusions for this entire episode. The first thing is there's nothing here that we can declare at all about filtration quality on any of this.
No.
Yeah, so just to reiterate that. The other thing is all of the testing you've seen here is going to apply at this power level. It's not going to matter if you've got a 283 running 10,000 RPM making 500 horsepower, or if you've got a 540 that somehow only makes 540 horsepower.
It's about the airflow.
It's going to be about the same.
Not seeing huge differences, I would say that anything from this power level down is fine.
Exactly. Yeah. But if you are dealing, as you said, with 850 horsepower, these things are going to start to be more of an issue. I think what we saw with these filters all being virtually the same, I mean, within 4.5 horsepower, which earned him $100, that there was nowhere to go at all, because when we ran no filter and then added the paper and it only killed 5, well, it's not like the other ones were going to be able to add 20.
No, small gains and losses.
Not necessarily in order. I think we just found out that not in all applications does it matter whether you have a drop base or a flat base. And earlier than today, I would have said, oh yeah, we tested it. Flat bases can kill power.
And it's also going to depend on the top.
The other thing is what we've seen, I'm going to say every time, is that some sort of a base or plate or velocity stack is always better than an open carburetor.
Yes.
It just smooths that transition at the edge.
Yeah.
I think we learned that paper as far as we have seen, let's say it tends to kill power versus no filter at all. And that the oiled filters tend to make more power than the paper filters.
By a little bit.
In this case, it could be bigger in different applications. I think we can also say the two papers that we tested made the same power. I really wanted to find one of those papers with like no pleats in it that had almost no surface area. It might have made the same power, but it would have clogged much faster.
Yes. Yeah.
The oiled filters that we tested, they were really all the same except for this green one, which made another couple horsepower. And maybe there's a reason for that. Looking through it and reading their brochure and watching the power, it's like, okay, I don't know if it filters anything, but it did move more air.
Yeah, that was kind of an interesting explanation on how it actually filters. But it's not because of layers of material. It's some other magic that's going on there with positive and negative ions.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I think that's about it, other than the pros and cons of oil versus dry, which is oiled filters cost a lot more, but
A lot more one time.
you can wash them essentially forever.
Yeah.
If you're a guy willing to do that.
Are you?
No.
Neither am I.
I end up not having time, and one time I did it years ago, I made a mess of it. If I get a car that has an oiled filter in it and it's a caked up mess, as my junk tends to be, I throw it away.
I'm willing to wash them.
Yeah.
And it's not so much even having to re-oil them and spend all that extra time. I'm just willing to wash them. As I'd mentioned earlier to you, I even have a K&N filter in my heating and AC unit because I take it out and I go wash it off and put it back in.
Yeah.
And I bought one filter and now it's been there for, 8 or 10 years.
And you're
So-
not throwing away as much junk.
And honestly, I don't want to sound like Mr. Greenpeace, but that's truly,
It is.
I felt bad about throwing away just garbage and, because I was changing that filter once a month. And so now it's one time and I'm done.
Well, that turned into a lot more conversation and thought over something that I thought was going to be just a totally brain-dead test. I hope you picked up something from it because we learn something every single time we do this show that's called Engine Masters. Okay.
Oh, well.
I love guys like this where you just go, no, we're going to really bet now. We're not just going to wand things around. And all of a sudden, have you ever noticed that same sound in their throat when they start to choke?
I'm good for it, guys. All I have are hundreds in my wallet.
It's
so
okay, I've got change.
Hello, xin chào tất cả các bạn nhé. Lại là mình đây lại ra những video hay cho các bạn xem. Các bạn ơi, các bạn thấy hay thì hãy like, comment cho kênh của mình thật hay nhé. Ok các bạn.
Ok các bạn.
Vậy động anh đang mạng đang lag.
Đâu anh liên quan gì đến mạng lan?
Động của anh là mạng lag.
Điêu.
Vấn đề pha kem, chỉ cần họ lấy được 10 bình khí cười, bạn tiếp tục trong 3 ngày tại lễ hội âm nhạc sẽ dễ dàng kiếm được 100.000 đô. Đúng là có một lời của ngàn. Đêm đó Tyson gặp một nhà bán bóng bay tại lễ hội âm nhạc.
Có rơi đến sân
lại
đâu?
làm ăn.
Ai giờ?
Chẳng mấy chốc đã thu hút tổ chức xã hội đen bằng ô tô
Có
đến
lượt
để
con nói ra 9 giờ.
ai cho chúng mày bán hàng ở đây?
Hả?
Bãi đỗ xe, không ai cho phép chúng mày bán bóng bay, không ai cho hỏi bọn tao cũng không hỏi. Đây là địa bàn của bọn tao. Hóa ra là kinh doanh khí cười luôn bị ông chủ
À,
âm.
cái nào? Đăng nhập những lần không được thì để mai
Ai
nhé.
làm có thể nhịn chứ. Thế là
Tức là 11 giờ, 11 giờ
cho đám tài xế một trận, còn mình thu hết toàn bộ
Em không được thì trả ngày mai làm sao
Qua những lần chuyện này,
đến trưa mai
các
luôn.
anh em lấy lại
Trưa
thể
mai.
diện. Tuy thực lực của đối phương mạnh, nhưng nếu như muốn mở rộng quy mô ở đây thì sao có thể cứ trôi nổi mãi được. Chúng ta phải đi giành thể diện, lấy lại số tiền thuộc về chúng ta. Tôi không tham gia vào bạo lực. Chúng ta không dùng
10
thế
giờ
bạo
trưa
lực.
mai,
Chúng
12
ta
giờ trưa
phải
mai.
tóc suy nghĩ. Anh đã từng đọc Tôn Tử Binh Pháp chưa? Đã là binh pháp rồi thì chẳng phải là dùng bạo lực sao? Tôn Tử nói không
Đâu,
đánh mà
11
đọc
giờ,
là đánh
đấy,
cao
đến
nhất.
11 giờ ấy thì
Liên quan
11 giờ
thì
trưa
nói phải
mai
lấy
rồi.
được để thu phục người. Nhưng khi thực sự hành động thì lại bảo đám thuộc hạ Jacob sẽ tự chọn một chiếc gậy bóng chảy cầm thuận tay, một đoàn người hùng hổ hổ đi vào địa bàn của
Chăn
Bắc
xóa
Đại.
rồi. Tính là từ chiều giờ nó được 12 tiếng đâu.
Làm vợ đầu tàu, xong vào làm mẫu cho
8
đàn
tiếng,
em.
12
Nhưng khi
tiếng.
đang ăn thì đột nhiên có kẻ tương tác đến từ sau. May mà John kịp thời ra tay, giơ gậy tần cho hắn một trận,
Bọn
xong
ta
một điều chỉ đầu.
đâu?
Bọn họ coi như là đã
Bạn
lấy
chưa
lại
làm
được
có
tiền
tiền.
riêng, nhưng giải quyết xong được một vấn đề thì lại có vấn đề mới xuất hiện. Em trai White bệnh ung thư, sắp hẹo rồi. Ông phải về New York gặp mặt em trai lần cuối. White xỏ giày Chelsea, đeo đồng hồ vào và dùng tư thái cao ngạo để đi tiễn em trai đoạn đường cuối cùng. Nhưng chính chuyến đi bất ngờ này khiến ông biết được một chuyện kinh động. White vừa vô tình biết được trong thời gian ông ngồi tù, con gái
Ồ, chủ máu thịt bị bắt rồi.
Đại ca cũng có biết chuyện này không? Nếu như hắn ta biết mà lại bao biện cho thuộc hạ của mình, vậy thì hắn ta chính là đối tượng báo thù của
Ai
ông,
nhỉ?
chứ không chỉ là
Trốn
giải
thuế.
quyết một tên đàn em.
Trốn thuế bị bắt.
Có biết
Nghìn
hay
tỷ
không?
mà.
Sau khi xác nhận ông ta quả thực không biết chuyện này thì Oanh cũng buông tay ra,
Biết là
ông
một.
xông thẳng tới câu lạc bộ, chẳng nói chẳng rằng tung cho hắn một đồng, sau đó bồi thêm vài cú đá, động vào con gái tao. Oanh, ông rút thắt lưng,
Lâu mới
siết
mơ
chặt
đi
đầu
nói
hắn ta,
không?
quay sang
Hả?
đập vào con gái tao.
Hôm lâu mới
Hắn ta
mơ
bắt
nghe
đầu,
con
Oanh
sao?
đạp thêm một phát vào đầu hắn. Đây chính là kết cục của kẻ đắc tội với lão đại xã hội.
Con đấy là Nghĩa đấy.
Giải quyết xong thằng tối nay, Oanh lập tức nói chuyện này cho
Nghĩa là con ông đấy.
nhưng con gái không những không cảm động, ngược lại con gái lại không vẻ buồn bã, cô sợ mình sẽ bị đám xã hội đen báo thù, nhưng White lại không cho là thế. Ông rất hiểu phong cách làm việc của tên đại ca đó, tuy rất xấu xa nhưng sẽ không giận cá chém thớt, bọn họ sẽ chỉ nhắm vào bàn. Con sẽ rất an toàn. Đại ca sau khi biết chuyện này thì ông ta rất đồng tình với cách làm của White, nhưng Chicky lại không cho rằng là thế. Anh ta đòi phải xử lý White và con gái ông ta. Con nhắc tới con gái ông ta à? Con gái ông ta có lỗi gì đâu. Nếu là tôi sẽ phải lột xa hắn. Nhưng cho dù là thế thì Chicky vẫn không muốn bỏ qua cho Oanh. Anh ta vẫn muốn cho ông đến trước cổ để chứng minh địa vị của mình trong băng đảng. Nếu mày bằng một nửa ông ta thì chuyện này sẽ không xảy ra. Chính câu nói này đã khiến Chicky đã sinh ra tâm muốn xử ba mình. Có ba và Oanh thì anh ta mãi mãi không tự làm chủ. Tối đó lúc gội đầu cho ba, Chicky đã hỏi ba một vấn đề. Ba cho rằng Oanh giỏi hơn con sao? Nói cái đắc gì thế? Tao gửi đứa con với mày. Trong lòng Chicky biết rõ đáp án, thế nên đã nảy sinh lòng thù hận. Sau đó tin tức đại ca phát bệnh tim đã truyền khắp các băng đảng, các thủ lĩnh đã tề tựu lại. Một tên đầy dã tâm như Chicky tất nhiên sẽ không bỏ lỡ cơ hội này. Anh ta đổ những cái chết của đại ca cho Oanh, nói chính sự xuất hiện của Oanh khiến bệnh tim của đại ca nặng hơn. Và anh ta còn xúi dục các thủ lĩnh cùng xử lý Oanh, nhưng có vài người lại hiểu rõ con người Oanh, ra sức bảo vệ ông. Cho dù không có công lao thì cũng có khổ lao. Ông ta cũng đã chiếm nửa Giang Sơn cho đại ca. Ông ta là một truyền kỳ, tao sẽ xử mày trước. Thằng khốn nạn có ý đồ phản bội. Chicky tức giận kết thúc tang lễ sớm. Sau đó anh ta thảo mai gọi điện cho Oanh. Thái độ thay đổi 180 độ. Anh ta cứ như một đứa trẻ phạm lỗi phép nép nói rằng những thủ ấn trước đó sẽ chung cùng với người ba đã mất. Sau này mọi người sẽ đoàn kết lại, cùng nhau xây dựng băng đảng vì để biểu đạt thành ý. Chicky kiên quyết muốn tới Tulsa để gặp Oanh. Nghe tới đây, Oanh liền hiểu hắn ta đang có âm mưu xấu. Tôi thấy không cần thiết phải tới. Không, tôi muốn làm thế. Chuyện cũng cần được xí xóa hết. Nói đến thế rồi thì Oanh chỉ đánh tư tưởng thần kế. Được, cậu có biết tìm tôi ở đâu không? Sau khi cúp máy, Vince ở bên cạnh vỗ tay tán dương, xử lý hắn. Lúc này Oanh đang hẹn hò với cô bạn gái nhỏ của mình. Không ngờ ngay sau đó có đám người nổ súng về phía bọn họ. Tyson vừa ra ngoài thì lập tức lái xe quay về. Oanh giao súng cho Tyson. Giấu nó đi, tôi sẽ băm nát hắn ta. Khi tới cục cảnh sát, Oanh nói gì cũng không biết. Cuối cùng hết thời gian tạm giam. Bên cảnh sát không có chứng cứ xác thực nên chỉ có thể để ông đi. Tên đàn em của Oanh đã điều tra ra người ám sát ông chính là băng đảng xe mô tô ở khu này. Quân Chip đã ghi hận Oanh từ lúc ông cướp mất thị trường khí cười của bọn họ. Vì thế Cao Lan Quân Chip đã hạ mình hẹn Oanh ra đàm phán. Nếu như ông lịch sự tới cửa gặp tôi, quỳ xuống xin tôi chia cho tí lợi nhuận thì sẽ không có những chuyện không vui xảy ra. Ông nói xem có đúng không? Nhưng Oanh không hề nể mặt ông ta. Ông dứt khoát từ chối đối phương. Chỉ cần ông muốn thì ông chắc chắn sẽ không nương tay. Nếu đã không đàm phán được vậy thì chỉ có thể sử dụng nắm đấm. Quân Chip uy hiếp cảnh sát, cho dù thế nào thì cũng phải tống cổ Oanh vào tù. Anh cảnh sát định từ chối bởi vì anh ta biết nếu đắc tội với Oanh thì sẽ không có kết cục tốt đẹp. Nhưng anh ta không còn cách nào khác vì điểm yếu của anh ta đang ở trong tay Quân Chip, vì thế cảnh sát buộc phải nghe Quân Chip. Thế là trên đường đi, anh ta đã chặn Oanh lại định vu oan giá họa, bắt Oanh về tội tấn công cảnh sát để kết thúc sự việc. Tôi đang cầm một khẩu súng lục cỡ nòng 357, trang bị đạn đầu giống 158, nó có thể tạo thành một cái lỗ trên người anh đấy.
Mà em hai anh Năm nhìn trẻ này mà chiến anh ba nhìn trẻ mắt không nhỉ?
Súng lại rồi chuồn mất, nhưng bọn
Trẻ
họ
vãi.
không biết rằng Oanh không hề mang theo súng.
Ngút
Tôi
phí
đã để
luôn.
quên súng ở khách sạn rồi.
Kim tụt
Biết
phí
được
luôn.
tên cảnh sát đã thất bại, Quân Chip chỉ đành
Kim
đứng
tụt
ra
đâu?
tay, sắp xếp hai tên thủ
Kim
hạ
tụt
để
đâu?
ám sát Oanh. May mà Bill ở cạnh ông,
Béo này Kim
không chỉ
tụt.
xử được một tên sát thủ mà còn chắn đạn cho Oanh. Sau khi
Thương
ra
béo
khỏi
là Kim
cục cảnh
tụt.
sát, Oanh lập tức chạy tới bệnh viện. Thấy Oanh tới, tâm trạng của Bill liền tốt hơn, bởi vì sự
Béo
việc
nó
này
đẩy
đã
ra Kim phải rụt vào.
Cô đặc vụ của quản lý vũ khí và tội phạm giám sát trong những quan hệ đặc biệt. Điều này
Béo
sẽ
phải bị
khiến
rụt.
Bill mất việc. Cô còn 2 năm nữa là có thể định
Vạch ra xem nào.
Ngoài ra gửi cô đừng lo lắng, ông nói ông sẽ bù đắp thật tốt cho cô.
Lớn
Vì
quá.
đã đấu với ông đã. Ngày hôm sau
Béo
Oanh bắt
cả
đầu
béo
điều
béo
tra
cả
đàn
bốn.
em.
Béo ai nhiều nhỉ?
Mùa này trông chẳng tin là bọn họ có thể làm được việc. Cô liền lập tức phản ứng. Anh nói thẳng việc cầm súng vào đầu người ta thì anh khó chịu. Mà Tyson lại càng vui hơn. Anh ta cầm súng cuốn kéo. Nên hip hop của người da đen được biết chỉ có
Tám
anh
cân
ta.
thì
Có
phải.
vấn đề gì
Ngáo
sao?
người nó khác, tám chơi là một cái này nó khác.
Có vấn đề gì?
Này chân to. Nhìn
Vấn đề
tên
là cái
tám
góc
cân
anh sẽ bị bọn
hai
chúng
cái đùi
đánh
to.
Nhìn cái đám nhạo
khác đấy, chi
Chi
nó ở cái dòng
cái
con chân to
kia,
đấy,
ông bảo
chi
Mít
giữa hai
và
cái
Mít
đùi
không
để
được
dùng.
chịu được. Mít nói anh có vài người anh em đang muốn kiếm chút tiền tiêu vặt. Thế là Mít đã đưa họ tới gặp Oanh. Oanh đi thẳng vào vấn đề. Các anh có ý kiến gì? Nếu như ông mình nằm bước tay thì chúng tôi thừa nhận trước khi trận chiến với băng đảng Mito diễn ra, Oanh còn phải giải quyết một phiền phức nào nữa. Chicky từ New York tới đây, chuẩn bị xử lý Oanh và tuyên chiến công nghiệp mới lập ở quốc gia của ông. Nhưng Oanh không thể nghĩ nhận với hắn ta. Ông đi thẳng vào vấn đề, vạch rõ ranh giới với
Nói thật cũng
Chicky.
đi
Mày
không?
có biết
Đài
tại
đi
sao
không?
phải chậm phát triển thế? Này, sao tao chỉ đại ca mày như thế? Là mày đang nói đại ca ra từ nhà mày. Mày là một thằng không chuyên đi dáng. Chỉ biết gây sự trục trặc của đại ca gì. Mày đây tao tới đây chính là muốn tao chết. Kiểu lưu đày như Napoleon nói, bọn tao đã chuẩn bị cho mày một
chim
món
to
đặc
như
sản
phở.
tên là eo bà. Để thể muốn
Chim
xem
to
là
như
mày sẽ chết
tốt,
ở đó.
tốt còn
Nhưng
tốt.
mày đoán xem, bọn tao đã kiếm được tiền. Đó là những gì
Cái
ông
gì
phải
vậy?
làm. Trọng điểm là tao với mày cắt đứt rồi. Vì thế bọn mày nên đóng gói và cút khỏi địa bàn của tao càng xa càng tốt. Chicky bị mắng đến ngu người, nhưng Oanh không cho anh ta có cơ hội đáp trả. Lúc này thì hay rồi, không chỉ bị mà còn mất một trận thủ đắc lực. Đúng là nên xử bọn mày ngay lúc này và ngay tại đây. Mày cứ làm đi, nhưng mày không làm được đâu. Có nhìn thấy bọn họ không? Đây là thủ hạ của tao. Xử lý xong chuyện của Chicky. Oanh bảo Woody hack tài khoản của Woody không chỉ là ông chủ tiệm thuốc mà còn là một hacker khét tiếng. Chỉ vài giây, 30 triệu đô của một chip đặt một cánh khoản bay. Ngày hôm sau, Villa nhận được một bức thư. Bên trong ngoài những câu yêu đương của Oanh thì còn có một tài khoản ngân hàng. Villa cắm vào máy tính để kiểm tra thì thấy có 10 triệu đô. Woody rất nổi hộp. Lập tức triệu tập tất cả đàn em. Oanh cũng đã chuẩn bị xong xuôi từ lâu. Khi tiếng xe của bọn chúng tới gần thì Oanh bảo họ thuê mai ngồi sẵn. Ngồi đợi bọn họ thì đường xuống diêm hương. Mấy tên đàn em vừa vào cửa thì đã bị ăn vài viên kẹo đồng. Đám Oanh đi ra từ quầy bar, tấn công dồn dập, bắn cho đối phương thành cái sảng. Quân chỉ thấy vậy liền lấy tên đàn em để chắn đạn rồi chuẩn bị trốn chạy. Oanh từ bên cạnh nhào tới, giơ tay tận cho hắn vài phát. Hắn còn chưa kịp phản ứng thì lại bị Oanh nhấn chặt lên tường. Mày còn cảm thấy tao không tự lượng sức mình không? Từ đó, Oanh trở thành vương của Tucson. Oanh cũng đón con gái tới đây, bù đắp cho cô 25 năm tiền thưởng lương của ba. Nhưng những ngày tháng tốt đẹp chẳng kéo dài được bao lâu. Hôm đó thì Oanh và đàn em đang ăn mừng ở quán bar. Đột nhiên thuộc hạ tới báo Villa đang đợi ông ở cửa. Oanh ra đón cô, hỏi cô sao không vào trong hồn. Không ngờ ngay sau đó một đám cảnh sát xuất hiện. Thì ra FBI điều tra ra cô và Oanh có quan hệ thân mật. Bây giờ cô phải đối mặt với nguy cơ giáng chức. Vì để giữ được partner của mình, Villa đưa 10 triệu đô cho cảnh sát. Cảnh sát đã tới bắt Oanh về tội hối lộ quan chức chính phủ. Cứ như vậy Oanh lăn lộn vất vả lại bị đưa vào tù viết. Ông không buồn về việc Villa phản bội, mà ông chỉ cảm thấy có lỗi với con gái. Không ngờ chuyện này lại tới. Ba xin lỗi, mãi mới được con gái tha thứ. Bây giờ lại dẫn lên vết xe đổ 25 năm trước. Ông từng là chủ mafia New York. Vì đại ca mà hồi tù người đàn ông cố tình vẽ lệch vòng tròn, rồi ném mạnh xuống đất, sau đó lại vẽ lệch lần nữa, rồi lại ném xuống đất. Nhìn qua thì cái gì bị run tay, nhưng thực ra anh đang gian lận. Vừa nãy thôi, cái gì viết thì sổ giấy chia sàn. Một đĩnh thực táo bạo nói lên trong bức ảnh. Anh nhặt những mảnh giấy vương vãi trên đất, rồi cẩn thận nhét vào bên bên cạnh. Anh thấy được kẹp hoàn hảo bên trong một giấy, dù có lắc thế nào cũng không thể rơi ra. Hơn nữa còn có thể dễ dàng lấy ra từ bên trong. Cấu trúc hoàn hảo không bị vết này, cái gì thì anh đã nghĩ ra cách để đánh bại chủ tịch. Nghe vậy, các đồng đội đều ngơ ngác.
Quá khứ em ơi lại chỉ là
Cái lô chồng ngồi trở đỉnh mình với tù là mới lâu.
sao? Cái gì?
Luôn luôn thì quyết luôn.
Anh mà phải chớ ra đi, mở luôn này, chớ cái gì?
Kinh kinh ấy, nghe ngửa luôn. Rồi vợ thì nhà ngóng trông gấu chờ bố ngửa luôn rồi đấy. Trời kinh nhỉ. Dạ. Lướt áp hẹn hò Facebook. Giờ em này ở đâu? Em này ở đâu? Mình cô anh Chi nhỉ? Giờ
nói chuyện lúc nào cũng nhắc đến cái bà sân vích lúc nào bà cũng con
giờ hỏi Chiến bà nào cái con mẹ đang khởi động máy mông cũng thích. Bà kêu không cho đấy biết giờ hỏng rồi.
anh qua cái em này cho bà con này ra ngoài
Con sinh gái quyết đi rồi máu lắm.
em này cho bà đi ngoài ra bà
Hôm qua khoa chị 300. Không đánh à? Được là bọn em đi tiền nữa đâu rồi bảo thôi nhưng mà đánh là kia không đánh được. Phí tiền nữa. Nói câu hài đấy. Cái pha lúc anh cũng lấy
Anh Luận thì chửi cho anh. Đánh rồi thôi cặp yếu thì phải chịu chứ.
Cặp khỏe như nhà bò đúng không?
Mẹ thì chả nhẽ thằng nào cũng ngon. Đó, cặp khỏe anh qua chứ không được. Chơi nó phải xanh chín.
Kia thì sao?
Phương Thảo Tuấn này. Hả? Chắc lúc này.
Xưa về năm mà Tuấn yêu xong rồi thì mới chia tay mẹ cười tầm cái trận.
Sao anh biết nói?
Vì bạn cười rất nhiều chứ.
Ừ? Lên đâu? Hả? Hà Nội á? Sao con này ở Hà Nội đâu? Không. Phải.
Nó bây giờ nó cũng đang làm ở Hà Nội ấy. Chịu rồi. Chúc mày hỏi Tuấn anh Nam là người yêu chưa? Tuấn có về nữa đâu? Sụp cả đêm mà. Nay người yêu về mai người yêu đi bố mất rồi. Tranh thủ thôi. Người ngủ cũ mày thức. Bảo ơi, cái Tuấn ngày nay về nhiều là cầu cao, con nhái nhảy lên đường bê tông nó xuống nước này, người nó quát vào. Vào thôi nào.
Vặt nữa.
Đi thử đi. Thử nhá. Người đi. Rồi.
Xin chào và hẹn gặp lại các bạn nha. Ok các bạn ơi.